What if the quality of your entire life was determined not by what happens to you, but by how you respond emotionally to what happens to you? You can grab your own copy of this transformative book through the link in the video description below. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with messages about pursuing happiness and avoiding negative emotions at all costs, Thibaut Meurisse offers a refreshingly different perspective. His book, Master Your Emotions, challenges the conventional wisdom that emotional mastery means eliminating negative feelings. Instead, he presents a comprehensive framework for understanding, accepting, and ultimately transforming our entire emotional experience, both positive and negative, to create a richer, more meaningful life. Unlike many self-help books that offer simplistic solutions to complex emotional challenges, Meurisse dives deep into the psychology and neuroscience behind our feelings while still maintaining an accessible, practical approach. He combines scientific research with actionable strategies, creating a roadmap for emotional intelligence that readers can immediately apply to their daily lives. This balance between theory and practice makes the book particularly valuable. It's not just about understanding emotions intellectually, but about developing the skills to work with them effectively. What distinguishes Master Your Emotions from other books in this genre is its holistic approach. Rather than focusing on a single technique or perspective, Meurisse examines emotions from multiple angles: biological, psychological, behavioral, and even philosophical. He recognizes that true emotional mastery requires addressing all these dimensions rather than seeking a one-size-fits-all solution. This comprehensive framework acknowledges the complexity of human emotions, while still breaking them down into manageable components we can work with. Perhaps most importantly, Meurisse emphasizes that emotional mastery isn't about controlling or suppressing feelings, but about developing a healthier relationship with our entire emotional spectrum. The goal isn't to eliminate negative emotions, which would be both impossible and undesirable, but to understand their messages, reduce their unnecessary intensity and duration, and use them as catalysts for growth and positive change. This nuanced approach offers a path to emotional freedom that doesn't require us to deny our authentic human experience. Let's explore the key insights from this transformative book that has helped countless readers develop greater emotional intelligence and resilience. Understanding the nature of emotions. Meurisse begins by addressing a fundamental question: what exactly are emotions? While we all experience them constantly, few of us have taken the time to understand what they are, how they work, and why we have them in the first place. This lack of understanding often leads to an adversarial relationship with our feelings, especially the uncomfortable ones. At their core, emotions are biological signals designed to help us survive and thrive. They evolved to provide quick, automatic responses to environmental stimuli, preparing our bodies for appropriate action without requiring conscious thought. Fear triggers physiological changes that prepare us to fight or flee from danger. Disgust helps us avoid potentially harmful substances. Even so-called negative emotions serve essential functions in our survival and well-being. Meurisse explains the basic neuroscience of emotions, describing how different brain regions, particularly the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and limbic system, interact to create our emotional experience. The amygdala serves as an emotional alarm system, constantly scanning for potential threats and triggering rapid responses. The prefrontal cortex provides rational oversight and regulation. Understanding this biological basis helps demystify emotions and recognize that they're not arbitrary or meaningless. They're sophisticated evolutionary tools. The book distinguishes between primary emotions, basic feelings like fear, anger, sadness, joy, disgust, and surprise, and secondary emotions, more complex feelings that build upon primary ones, like shame, guilt, or pride. Primary emotions happen to us automatically, while secondary emotions often involve more cognitive processing and are influenced by our beliefs, past experiences, and cultural conditioning. This distinction is crucial because it helps us identify where we have more potential for conscious intervention. Meurisse introduces a key concept. Emotions themselves are neither positive nor negative, they're simply information. What makes an emotion negative isn't the feeling itself, but our resistance to it, our judgment of it as bad or wrong, and our attempts to suppress or avoid it. This perspective shift from emotions as problems to emotions as data creates the foundation for a healthier relationship with our entire emotional spectrum. The book emphasizes that emotions are temporary states, not permanent conditions, though our tendency to identify with them often makes them feel more enduring than they actually are. When we say, "I am angry," rather than "I feel anger right now," we unconsciously reinforce the emotion's grip on our identity and experience. Learning to observe emotions as passing phenomena rather than defining characteristics is a crucial step toward emotional freedom. Meurisse addresses common misconceptions about emotions, particularly the idea that some feelings are inherently bad and should be eliminated. He argues that all emotions serve purposes, even the uncomfortable ones, and the goal isn't to stop having certain feelings but to understand them, express them appropriately, and avoid being controlled by them. This nuanced view creates space for the full range of human emotion, while still acknowledging that some emotional patterns can become problematic. The book outlines the difference between emotional reactions and responses. Reactions are automatic, unconscious, and often disproportionate to the situation. Responses are conscious, chosen, and appropriate to the circumstances. Emotional mastery isn't about eliminating reactions, which is impossible, but about expanding the gap between stimulus and response, creating space for conscious choice rather than automatic reactivity. Meurisse also explores the concept of emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions while also empathizing with others. He argues that this skill set might be more important for life success and satisfaction than traditional intelligence, citing research showing that EQ, emotional quotient, often predicts outcomes better than IQ in areas like relationship satisfaction, career advancement, and overall well-being. One of the book's most valuable insights is that emotions don't happen randomly. They're generated through specific pathways that we can learn to identify and influence. By understanding the process through which emotions form, we gain leverage points for intervention rather than feeling at the mercy of seemingly unpredictable feelings. The Emotion Generation Model. Building on his introduction to emotional basics, Meurisse presents a comprehensive model for understanding how emotions are generated. This framework provides a map of the emotional process, revealing several points where we can potentially influence our experience rather than being passive recipients of whatever feelings arise. The model begins with an event or stimulus, something that happens either externally in our environment or internally in our thoughts. Importantly, the objective event itself doesn't directly cause our emotions. Instead, it's our perception and interpretation of the event that generates the emotional response. Two people can experience the same external situation, yet have completely different emotional reactions based on how they perceive and interpret it. Our perceptions are influenced by numerous factors: past experiences, beliefs, values, physical state, current mood, and expectations. These filters color how we see situations, often without our conscious awareness. Someone who was criticized harshly as a child might perceive neutral feedback as an attack. Someone who believes people can't be trusted might interpret friendly overtures as manipulation. These perceptual filters operate automatically unless we develop the awareness to recognize and question them. After perception comes appraisal, our evaluation of what the situation means for our well-being, goals, and values. This largely unconscious assessment happens almost instantaneously and determines whether we experience the event as positive, negative, or neutral. The brain is constantly asking questions like, is this threatening? Does this help or hinder my goals? Does this align with or violate my values? The answers to these questions shape our emotional response. Meurisse emphasizes that our appraisals often happen so quickly that we don't even notice them. They feel like objective reality rather than subjective interpretation. Learning to identify these automatic appraisals is crucial for emotional mastery, as they represent a key leverage point where we can potentially shift our experience. Following appraisal comes the actual emotion, a complex mind-body state involving physiological changes like increased heart rate or muscle tension, urges towards certain actions like fighting or fleeing, subjective feelings and cognitive changes like narrowed attention or biased thinking. These components of emotion prepare us to respond to the situation based on our appraisal of its significance. The final step in the model is behavior, how we express and act on the emotion. This might involve directly expressing the feeling, like shouting when angry, suppressing it, hiding our disappointment, regulating it, taking deep breaths to calm anxiety, or acting on the action tendency associated with it, retreating when afraid. Our behavioral choices then influence our environment, potentially creating new situations that restart the emotion generation cycle. Meurisse emphasizes that while the initial emotional reaction often happens automatically, we have increasing levels of choice as we move through the model. We may not choose the initial emotional surge, but we can influence how we interpret situations, how we relate to the emotions that arise, and especially how we behave in response to our feelings. Understanding this emotion generation model provides a map for intervention. Instead of feeling helpless about our emotional reactions, we can identify specific points in the process where we can potentially create change, shifting our perception, questioning our appraisals, relating differently to the emotion itself, or choosing our behavioral response more consciously. The book includes practical exercises for working with each component of the model. For perception, Meurisse suggests practices for recognizing and questioning our automatic interpretations of events. For appraisals, he offers techniques to identify and challenge the evaluations that drive emotional intensity. For the emotions themselves, he provides strategies for mindful acceptance rather than resistance. And for behavior, he outlines approaches for responding constructively even amid strong feelings. This comprehensive model transforms emotions from mysterious, uncontrollable experiences into understandable processes with multiple points of potential influence. While we can't simply turn emotions on and off like a switch, understanding the complete generation pathway gives us far more agency than most people realize. The role of thoughts in emotional experience. Having established his emotion generation model, Meurisse explores one of its most critical components in depth: the role of thoughts in creating and intensifying our emotional reactions. While emotions have biological components, our thinking patterns dramatically influence which emotions we experience and how intensely we feel them. The book introduces the cognitive model popularized by psychologists like Aaron Beck and David Burns, which shows how specific thought patterns trigger and amplify emotional responses. At the core of this approach is the recognition that it's not events themselves, but our interpretations of events that primarily determine our emotional reactions. Meurisse identifies several common cognitive distortions, systematic thinking errors that fuel difficult emotions. These include catastrophizing, imagining the worst possible outcome, black and white thinking, viewing situations in extreme all-or-nothing terms, personalization, assuming events are related to you when they might not be, mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking, and emotional reasoning, treating feelings as evidence of reality. These distortions function as unconscious habits of mind that automatically color our perceptions and appraisals. When we catastrophize a minor mistake at work, anxiety escalates. When we engage in black and white thinking about a relationship challenge, disappointment transforms into despair. These thought patterns happen so quickly and automatically that we rarely question them, yet they powerfully shape our emotional landscape. The book emphasizes that while we can't simply think our way out of emotions, which have biological components beyond cognitive control, becoming aware of and addressing distorted thinking can significantly reduce unnecessary emotional suffering. Many of our most painful emotional experiences are intensified or even created by thoughts that don't accurately reflect reality. Meurisse offers a practical process for working with distorted thoughts. First, identify the specific emotion you're experiencing. Next, identify the thoughts associated with that feeling. Then examine the evidence for and against those thoughts. Finally, generate more balanced, realistic alternative perspectives. This isn't about replacing negative thoughts with inauthentic positive ones, but about seeing situations more accurately rather than through the lens of cognitive distortion. The book introduces the concept of core beliefs, fundamental assumptions about ourselves, others, and the world that often operate outside our awareness, yet profoundly influence our emotional patterns. Someone with the core belief, "I'm not good enough," will likely experience frequent anxiety, shame, and inadequacy. Someone who believes the world is dangerous will tend toward chronic fear and worry. Identifying and addressing these deeper belief structures can create lasting shifts in emotional tendencies rather than just managing individual episodes. Meurisse suggests various techniques for uncovering core beliefs, including the downward arrow technique, repeatedly asking what a distressing thought means about you, examining recurrent emotional patterns for common themes, and noticing extreme emotional reactions that might signal a core belief being triggered. Once identified, these beliefs can be examined for accuracy and gradually updated through new experiences and perspectives. The book distinguishes between productive and unproductive thinking about emotions. Productive emotional thinking involves briefly identifying what you're feeling, understanding what triggered it, extracting any useful information or lessons, and then returning attention to the present moment. Unproductive emotional thinking, like rumination, worry, or self-criticism, keeps us stuck in negative spirals without generating useful insights or solutions. Meurisse emphasizes that the goal isn't to control all our thoughts or to maintain only positive thinking, both impossible and potentially counterproductive aims. Rather, the objective is developing enough awareness of our thinking patterns to recognize when they're creating unnecessary suffering, and enough skill to relate to thoughts more consciously rather than being automatically driven by them. The book introduces mindfulness as a powerful approach for changing our relationship with thoughts. By learning to observe thoughts as mental events rather than facts about reality, we create space between ourselves and our thinking. This observational stance reduces the automatic power of thoughts to generate emotional reactions, allowing us to respond more choicefully to our mental content rather than being controlled by it. Developing emotional awareness. A cornerstone of Meurisse's approach is developing greater emotional awareness, the ability to recognize and accurately identify what we're feeling as we're feeling it. Without this fundamental skill, attempts at emotional management often fail because we can't effectively work with what we don't clearly recognize. The book addresses a common obstacle to emotional awareness, alexithymia, or difficulty identifying and describing emotions. Many people, particularly those raised in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, develop a disconnection from their feeling states. They might experience emotional reactions as vague physical discomfort, acting out behaviors, or general distress without being able to name specific emotions. This lack of emotional differentiation makes it nearly impossible to respond appropriately to emotional signals. Meurisse offers several practices for developing greater emotional vocabulary and awareness. One approach involves regularly checking in with yourself throughout the day, taking brief moments to identify what you're feeling in the present moment. Another technique uses an emotions wheel, a visual tool that helps distinguish between similar emotions and identify the specific nuances of what you're experiencing, like recognizing whether you're feeling anxious, worried, nervous, or frightened, all distinct variations of fear. The book emphasizes the importance of bodily awareness in emotional recognition. Emotions aren't just mental states but whole body experiences with specific physical signatures. Anger might manifest as heat in the face, tension in the jaw, or a surge of energy in the limbs. Sadness often involves heaviness in the chest, a lump in the throat, or a downward pull in the body. By becoming more attentive to these physical manifestations, we can catch emotions earlier and identify them more accurately. Meurisse suggests regular body scan practices, systematically bringing attention to different areas of the body and noticing sensations without judgment. This builds the habit of bodily awareness that forms the foundation for emotional recognition. Similarly, he recommends breath awareness practices, as the breath often reflects emotional states, shallow and rapid in anxiety, slow and constricted in sadness, and provides a direct connection to the autonomic nervous system that drives much of our emotional experience. The book addresses the phenomenon of emotional triggering, when current situations activate intense reactions based on past experiences, particularly painful or traumatic ones. These triggers often produce emotional responses that seem disproportionate to the current situation, because they're actually responses to accumulated past hurt being activated in the present moment. Developing the awareness to recognize when you've been triggered allows you to respond more appropriately rather than reacting to perceived threats that aren't actually present. Meurisse emphasizes the value of tracking emotional patterns over time. By keeping an emotion journal or using emotion tracking apps, you can identify recurring emotional tendencies, situations that regularly trigger certain feelings, and the typical progression of your emotional episodes. This data collection reveals patterns that might not be obvious in the moment and provides valuable insights for developing more effective emotional management strategies. The book distinguishes between primary and secondary emotional responses. Primary emotions are the initial reactions to situations, while secondary emotions are reactions to the primary emotions themselves, like feeling ashamed about being afraid or angry about feeling sad. These secondary emotions often cause more suffering than the primary ones and tend to extend emotional episodes unnecessarily. Developing the awareness to recognize this layering allows you to address the core emotion directly rather than getting caught in complicated emotional chains. Meurisse introduces the practice of naming to tame, explicitly labeling emotions as they arise. Neuroscience research shows that simply naming what we're feeling activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala activation, literally calming the brain's emotional center. This simple act of identification helps prevent overwhelming emotional floods and begins the process of emotional regulation. Perhaps most importantly, the book emphasizes cultivating curiosity rather than judgment toward emotional experiences. Many of us have been taught to evaluate emotions as good or bad, appropriate or inappropriate, which creates additional layers of resistance and struggle. By approaching feelings with genuine interest, what is this emotion? What's it trying to tell me? We develop a healthier relationship with our emotional life and access the valuable information emotions provide. Practical strategies for emotional regulation. Building on the foundation of emotional awareness, Meurisse offers a comprehensive toolkit of practical strategies for regulating emotions, reducing their intensity when overwhelming, extending positive states, and working with challenging feelings effectively. Rather than presenting a one-size-fits-all approach, he provides diverse techniques to address different types of emotional challenges. The book begins with physiological regulation strategies that target the bodily components of emotion directly. Deep, diaphragmatic breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, counteracting the sympathetic arousal of stress emotions like anxiety and anger. Progressive muscle relaxation reduces the physical tension that both reflects and reinforces emotional intensity. And physical exercise provides an outlet for the action tendencies associated with emotions like frustration and restlessness, while releasing endorphins that improve mood. Meurisse emphasizes the bidirectional relationship between body and emotions. Not only do emotions create bodily changes, but deliberately changing bodily states can influence emotions. Simply adjusting posture from slump to upright can reduce feelings of defeat and increase confidence. Intentionally softening the facial muscles can decrease stress. These physical interventions provide immediate access points for emotional regulation when cognitive approaches might be difficult to implement. The book addresses attention deployment, strategically directing focus to regulate emotional experience. Distraction can provide temporary relief from overwhelming feelings, creating space for more constructive approaches later. Mindful awareness of the present moment can interrupt rumination cycles that intensify negative emotions, and deliberately shifting attention to positive aspects of situations without denying difficulties can help maintain balanced emotional perspective. Meurisse introduces reappraisal techniques, changing how we interpret emotion-generating situations to alter their emotional impact, reframing challenges as opportunities for growth, finding meaning in difficult experiences, and considering alternative explanations for others' behavior all help transform emotional reactions without denying or suppressing authentic feelings. The book emphasizes that reappraisal isn't about forcing artificial positivity, but about finding legitimate alternative perspectives that might be equally or more accurate than our initial interpretations. The book explores acceptance-based approaches that work not by changing emotions directly, but by changing our relationship with them. Emotional acceptance involves allowing feelings to be present without resistance, judgment, or attempts to control them, recognizing that emotions themselves aren't the problem, but our struggle against them often creates additional suffering. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but an active, willing stance that paradoxically often leads to emotional transformation more effectively than direct control attempts. Meurisse discusses self-compassion as a powerful emotional regulation strategy. When facing difficult feelings, treating ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a good friend creates emotional resilience. Self-compassion involves three elements: mindfulness of what we're experiencing, recognition of our common humanity, understanding that suffering is part of the shared human experience rather than a personal failure, and self-kindness rather than harsh self-judgment. The book addresses expression strategies, healthy ways to acknowledge and communicate emotions rather than suppressing or impulsively acting on them. Techniques like journaling provide private outlets for processing feelings. Assertive communication allows for authentic expression while respecting others' boundaries. And creative expression through art, music, or movement can access and release emotional states that might be difficult to process verbally. Meurisse explores cognitive diffusion techniques from acceptance and commitment therapy, methods for creating psychological distance from distressing thoughts that fuel difficult emotions. Labeling thoughts as thoughts, I'm having the thought that I'll fail, rather than I'll fail. Thanking the mind for its contributions, or imagining thoughts as leaves floating down a stream, all help create space between ourselves and the mental content that drives emotional reactions. The book discusses situation selection and modification, proactively choosing or changing circumstances to manage emotional impact. This might involve temporarily avoiding triggers when particularly vulnerable, structuring environments to support emotional well-being, or strategically planning challenging conversations for times when you're well-rested and resourced. Meurisse emphasizes the importance of prevention strategies that address emotional well-being before crises occur. Regular sleep, nutrition, exercise, social connection, and meaningful activity create a foundation of emotional resilience, making specific regulation techniques more effective when needed. Many emotional struggles stem from neglecting these basics rather than lacking specific management skills. Throughout this section, the book emphasizes flexibility and personalization in emotional regulation. Different emotions, situations, and individuals may require different approaches. The goal isn't finding a single perfect technique, but developing a diverse toolkit of strategies that can be applied appropriately based on circumstances and personal preferences. Transforming specific challenging emotions. After establishing general principles and strategies for emotional regulation, Meurisse dedicates significant attention to working with specific challenging emotions that commonly create difficulty. Rather than treating all uncomfortable feelings identically, he recognizes that each emotion has unique characteristics, purposes, and effective management approaches. The book addresses anger, one of the most problematic emotions in modern life. Meurisse distinguishes between healthy anger that signals boundary violations or injustice and destructive anger that damages relationships and well-being. He suggests techniques like the cool-down expression approach, waiting until the initial intensity passes before addressing issues, physical outlets that discharge the activation energy safely, and investigating the underlying vulnerabilities, like feeling disrespected or powerless, that often fuel anger responses. Anxiety receives thorough treatment, with Meurisse explaining its evolutionary purpose while acknowledging how it often becomes excessive in contemporary environments. He offers cognitive strategies for examining the realistic probability and manageability of feared outcomes, exposure approaches that gradually build tolerance for anxiety-provoking situations, and grounding techniques for quickly returning to the present moment when worry pulls attention into catastrophic futures. The book explores sadness and grief, emphasizing their importance in processing loss and adjustment rather than being negative emotions to eliminate. Meurisse suggests allowing space for the natural expression of sadness through tears or quiet reflection, finding supportive others who can witness grief without trying to fix it, and gradually building new meaning and connection after significant losses. He distinguishes between normal sadness and clinical depression, noting when professional help might be needed beyond self-help approaches. Shame and guilt receive careful attention, with Meurisse distinguishing between shame, I am bad, that tends to be destructive, and appropriate guilt, I did something inconsistent with my values, that can motivate positive change. He offers strategies for developing self-compassion in the face of shame, making concrete amends when genuine mistakes have been made, and transforming perfectionistic standards that fuel chronic shame responses. The book addresses fear, exploring both its protective function and its potential to unnecessarily limit life experience. Meurisse suggests the fear-setting approach of clearly defining what you're afraid of, what you could do to prevent negative outcomes, how you would cope if they occurred anyway, and what you're losing by avoiding the feared situation. This realistic assessment often reveals that many fears are both less likely and more manageable than they initially appear. Jealousy and envy are examined for their underlying messages about personal insecurities and unmet needs. Rather than judging these feelings as petty or inappropriate, Meurisse suggests using them as information about what we value and where we might feel insufficient. He offers practices for transforming comparison into inspiration and focusing attention on developing personal strengths rather than resentment toward others' success. The book explores disappointment and frustration, emotions that signal the gap between expectations and reality. Meurisse suggests examining whether expectations were realistic, finding constructive lessons in setbacks, and developing greater acceptance of imperfection and uncertainty as natural aspects of life rather than problems to overcome. Boredom receives attention as an increasingly common emotion in our stimulation-saturated environment. Rather than automatically reaching for distraction, Meurisse suggests exploring the creative potential in boredom, using it as an opportunity to reconnect with deeper interests and values, and developing greater comfort with stillness and simplicity. Throughout these emotion-specific approaches, the book emphasizes the importance of asking what each feeling is trying to communicate. Emotions evolved as signaling systems, and even the most uncomfortable ones typically contain valuable information when approached with curiosity rather than immediate avoidance. Anger might signal boundary violations. Anxiety might highlight genuine risks. Sadness might reflect important losses that need acknowledgement. Meurisse repeatedly emphasizes that the goal isn't eliminating challenging emotions, an impossible and undesirable aim, but relating to them more skillfully. This might involve reducing their unnecessary intensity and duration, expressing them in constructive rather than destructive ways, extracting their wisdom, and preventing them from driving automatic behaviors that don't serve our larger purposes. Cultivating positive emotional states. While much of Master Your Emotions addresses working effectively with challenging feelings, Meurisse dedicates equal attention to actively cultivating positive emotional states. Rather than viewing positive emotions as merely the absence of negative ones, he presents them as distinct experiences with their own characteristics and cultivation methods. The book introduces the broaden and build theory from positive psychology, which demonstrates that positive emotions don't just feel good. They actually expand our awareness, creativity, and behavioral repertoire while building lasting psychological, social, and physical resources. Unlike negative emotions that narrow focus for immediate survival purposes, positive emotions open us to new possibilities and connections, creating upward spirals of growth and resilience. Meurisse emphasizes that positive emotions aren't just pleasant indulgences, but essential components of psychological health and effective functioning. Research shows that experiencing positive emotions regularly, even in small doses, builds resilience against stress, improves immune function, enhances problem solving, strengthens relationships, and increases overall life satisfaction and longevity. The book addresses common obstacles to positive emotions, particularly the negativity bias, wired into our brains that makes unpleasant experiences more salient and memorable than positive ones. This evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive threats now creates a tendency to overlook and undervalue positive experiences unless we consciously counterbalance this bias through deliberate practices. Meurisse introduces gratitude practices as powerful generators of positive emotion. By regularly identifying and appreciating positive aspects of life, from significant blessings to small daily pleasures, we train our attention to notice good things that would otherwise pass unregistered due to our negativity bias. The book suggests specific approaches like gratitude journals, gratitude visits, expressing appreciation directly to someone who has positively impacted your life, and mental subtraction, imagining your life without certain positive elements to enhance appreciation. The book explores the science of savoring, the art of fully attending to and extending positive experiences rather than rushing through them mindlessly. Savoring involves bringing full awareness to pleasant moments, deliberately enhancing their emotional impact through attention to sensory details, sharing the experience with others, or mentally photographing the moment for future enjoyment. These practices literally extend the neurological and psychological benefits of positive events beyond their actual duration. Meurisse addresses kindness and compassion practices that generate positive emotions while simultaneously benefiting others. Research shows that performing acts of kindness activates pleasure centers in the brain, creating genuine positive emotion rather than just moral satisfaction. The book suggests approaches ranging from formal loving-kindness meditation to simple daily acts of consideration, emphasizing that these practices benefit the giver as much as the recipient. The book explores flow states, conditions of complete absorption in optimally challenging activities that create a unique form of enjoyment more profound than passive pleasure. Meurisse outlines the conditions that foster flow, clear goals, immediate feedback, balanced challenge and skill, and freedom from self-consciousness and distraction. He suggests identifying personal flow-generating activities and deliberately creating conditions that support these deeply satisfying experiences. Meurisse introduces play and playfulness as undervalued sources of positive emotion in adult life. Beyond mere recreation, playful engagement with activities and relationships fosters creativity, reduces stress, strengthens social bonds, and generates authentic enjoyment. The book suggests ways to reincorporate playful approaches into work, relationships, and personal projects rather than reserving play only for designated leisure activities. The book addresses meaning and purpose as sources of positive emotion that transcend momentary happiness. When activities connect to values and contribute to something beyond self-interest, they generate a profound sense of fulfillment distinct from simpler pleasures. Meurisse suggests identifying core values, seeking ways to express them through daily activities, and connecting personal efforts to larger purposes beyond immediate self-gratification. Meurisse emphasizes the importance of social connection in generating positive emotions. Human brains are fundamentally social, with relationship quality serving as one of the strongest predictors of happiness across cultures and circumstances. The book suggests approaches for deepening existing relationships, creating new connections, and enhancing the quality of everyday social interactions through presence and genuine interest. Throughout this section, the book maintains a balanced perspective that neither dismisses nor overly idealizes positive emotions. Meurisse acknowledges that constant happiness isn't a realistic or even desirable goal, and that attempting to maintain perpetual positivity can create its own forms of suffering. The aim isn't eliminating the normal fluctuations of emotional life, but expanding our capacity for genuine positive states while responding skillfully to the inevitable challenging feelings that arise. Integrating emotional mastery into daily life. In the final sections of the book, Meurisse addresses the crucial question of how to integrate emotional mastery practices into everyday life, rather than treating them as isolated exercises. He emphasizes that true emotional intelligence emerges through consistent application in real-world situations, not just theoretical understanding or occasional practice. The book introduces the concept of emotional habits, recurring patterns of perceiving, interpreting, feeling, and acting that become automatic through repetition. Just as physical habits like brushing teeth eventually require minimal conscious effort, emotional habits like catastrophizing or self-criticism can become so ingrained that they feel like immutable parts of personality rather than learned responses that can be changed. Meurisse outlines a systematic approach for transforming emotional habits through consistent practice of alternative responses. This involves identifying specific emotional patterns you want to change, creating clear implementation intentions for how you'll respond differently when these patterns arise, practicing the new responses consistently until they begin to automatize, and celebrating progress to reinforce the developing habits. The book emphasizes the importance of environment design in supporting emotional mastery. Rather than relying solely on willpower, Meurisse suggests structuring your physical and social surroundings to naturally elicit desired emotional patterns. This might involve reducing exposure to triggering situations when building new skills, surrounding yourself with people who demonstrate emotional intelligence, or creating visual reminders of key emotional principles in your living and working spaces. Meurisse addresses the challenge of maintaining emotional practices during stressful periods, precisely when they're most needed yet often most difficult to implement. He suggests creating emergency protocols in advance, simplified versions of emotional management practices that remain accessible even when resources are depleted. These might include basic breathing techniques, short mindfulness practices, or simple self-compassion statements that can be deployed amid challenging circumstances. The book explores how to integrate emotional awareness into interactions with others, particularly during conflict situations. Meurisse offers techniques for maintaining emotional presence while communicating difficult feelings, detecting when reactions are disproportionate to current situations, suggesting past triggers at work, and creating sufficient internal regulation to respond consciously rather than react automatically to interpersonal challenges. Meurisse emphasizes the value of periodically reviewing your emotional development through structured reflection practices. These might include weekly reviews of emotional patterns and management efforts, monthly assessments of progress in specific emotional skills, or annual consideration of how your relationship with emotions has evolved. These reflection points prevent unconscious backsliding while highlighting growth that might otherwise go unnoticed due to its gradual nature. The book addresses setbacks and relapses, the inevitable periods when we fall back into old emotional patterns despite our best intentions. Rather than treating these as failures that negate progress, Meurisse suggests viewing them as valuable learning opportunities that reveal areas needing additional attention. The key isn't perfect consistency, but the ability to recognize setbacks quickly and return to constructive practices without extended self-criticism. Meurisse introduces the concept of emotional mentoring, both receiving guidance from those with greater emotional mastery and eventually offering support to others developing these skills. This bidirectional process accelerates growth by providing external perspective on blind spots, accountability for continued practice, and reinforcement through teaching what you're learning. The book emphasizes the ongoing, evolving nature of emotional mastery rather than presenting it as a destination to reach. Even those with highly developed emotional skills continue refining their relationship with feelings throughout life. This lifelong perspective removes the pressure of arriving at perfect emotional control while encouraging continued growth and learning regardless of current development level. Perhaps most importantly, Meurisse connects emotional mastery to larger life purposes beyond just feeling better. Developing skillful relationship with emotions enables more authentic connections with others, more effective pursuit of meaningful goals, greater resilience during inevitable life challenges, and fuller expression of your unique gifts and contributions. This purpose-oriented framing transforms emotional practices from self-improvement techniques to essential life skills that enable your deepest aspirations. Conclusion: the freedom of emotional mastery. As Meurisse concludes his comprehensive guide to working with emotions, he returns to his central premise. True emotional mastery isn't about controlling or eliminating feelings, but about developing a constructive relationship with your entire emotional spectrum. The freedom isn't from emotions themselves, but from being controlled by them, a subtle but profound distinction that changes everything about how we approach our emotional lives. The book emphasizes that emotional mastery is ultimately about choice, not choosing which emotions you experience, which is largely impossible, but choosing how you relate to them, interpret them, express them, and act in their presence. This choice emerges not from forceful control but from the awareness, understanding, and skills developed through consistent practice of the principles and techniques presented throughout the book. Meurisse addresses common misconceptions about emotional mastery, particularly the idea that it means maintaining constant positivity or never experiencing negative emotions. He reaffirms that the goal is neither suppressing authentic feelings nor indulging every emotional impulse, but finding the middle path where emotions are fully acknowledged while not being given complete control over behavior and decisions. The book highlights how emotional mastery transforms not just individual experiences, but entire life trajectories. When no longer driven primarily by emotional reactivity, you become capable of maintaining difficult commitments despite discomfort, building deeper relationships that withstand inevitable conflicts, pursuing meaningful purposes despite setbacks, and making decisions aligned with values rather than momentary feelings. Meurisse emphasizes that emotional mastery isn't a luxury or indulgence but a fundamental life skill with impacts across all domains, work performance, relationship quality, physical health, personal growth, and overall well-being. In a world increasingly characterized by complexity, uncertainty, and change, the ability to work. Meurisse emphasizes that emotional mastery isn't a luxury or indulgence, but a fundamental life skill with impacts across all domains: work performance, relationship quality, physical health, personal growth, and overall well-being. In a world increasingly characterized by complexity, uncertainty, and change, the ability to work skillfully with emotions becomes not just beneficial but essential for navigating modern life effectively. The book acknowledges the ongoing nature of emotional development. This isn't a process with a final destination, but a lifelong journey of increasing awareness, understanding, and skill. This perspective relieves the pressure of achieving perfect emotional control while encouraging continued growth regardless of current development level. Just as musicians or athletes continue refining their craft throughout their careers, emotional mastery represents an evolving practice rather than a fixed achievement. Meurisse emphasizes that the benefits of emotional mastery extend far beyond the individual. As you develop greater skill in working with your own emotions, you naturally become more capable of supporting others in their emotional experiences, whether children, partners, friends, or colleagues. This ripple effect creates positive impact in relationships, organizations, and communities as emotional intelligence gradually spreads through social connection. The book concludes with an invitation to begin or deepen this journey, not through dramatic transformation attempts, but through consistent small practices that gradually reshape your relationship with emotions. These modest daily efforts, applied consistently over time, create remarkable changes in emotional experience and expression. The path begins not with perfect application, but with willingness to engage emotions differently than you have before. Perhaps most powerfully, Meurisse reminds readers that emotions themselves aren't the enemy. They're essential aspects of human experience that provide richness, meaning, and wisdom when approached skillfully. The goal isn't eliminating parts of your emotional experience, but developing a relationship with your full emotional spectrum that allows you to live with greater freedom, authenticity, and effectiveness. By mastering emotions rather than being mastered by them, you reclaim the power to shape your life experience regardless of external circumstances. This emotional freedom represents perhaps the deepest form of personal liberty: the ability to respond consciously rather than react automatically, to choose your path based on values rather than momentary feelings, and to experience life's full range of emotions without being controlled by any of them. If you found this summary valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing book insights. Leave a comment sharing which emotional mastery technique resonated most strongly with you, or how you plan to implement these ideas in your own life. Your engagement helps our community grow and allows us to continue bringing you high-quality content. Remember, as Thibaut Meurisse would say, true freedom comes not from controlling your emotions, but from transforming your relationship with them. Thank you for watching.